Okay. I'm John Schultz. It's February 11th, 2017 in Pittsfield, Illinois. I'm here at the Pike County All Wars Museum.
Okay. I'm Lloyd Lawber. I'm a Vietnam veteran, and also happen to be president of the All Wars Museum. And we're doing these videos for all of our any veteran from Pike County that would like to be videotaped. But I'm again, my name is Lloyd E. Lawber. I was born in Pittsfield on March 29th, 1948. And I grew up in the Griggsville area, went to Griggsville schools. I graduated from Griggsville High School. And then at the end of high school, I went to a trade school in St. Louis, excuse me, for a couple of years and did architectural drafting. And then along about October of 1968, Uncle Sam knocked on my door and said, "We need you." So I was drafted and went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for my basic training. Drafted into the Army. I spent about 8 weeks of basic training at Fort Leonard Wood. And then I was shipped to Fort Lewis, Washington, just south of Seattle for advanced individual training. They call it AIT in the military. And I was in infantry training. And again, this was in late 68, early 69. And the Vietnam War was going pretty strong at the time. So I kind of had an idea what my future was like in the military. So after AIT, which was mainly basically infantry training, learning all the different weapons and firing them and all about military maneuvers, I got orders to go to Vietnam. So I came home from a short Christmas break, and then went back and finished my training, and then we flew. They flew me to Vietnam. I left Oakland Army Base. I think at 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And flew to Hawaii. Stopped for an hour in Honolulu, Hawaii. Then flew from Hawaii to Guam. Then Guam, we landed in Bien Hoa, Vietnam, which is just north of Saigon, not too far. Of course, when I landed in Vietnam, you're just very apprehensive and scared. I think every day I was in Vietnam, I was very scared. In a combat zone, you never know what's going to happen. So after about, I was that day from Bien Hoa Airport, just south of there, not very far, is a military base that was called Long Binh, and that was a major military base in Vietnam. And I spent about, and that was March the 19th when I landed in Vietnam. So I spent a couple weeks in training and processing in Long Binh at the 90th Replacement Center. And we did some other training there and tried to see if you could swim, which I wasn't a very good swimmer, but they had a big swimming pool we would swim in to see if you could swim across it. There's a lot of water in Vietnam, a lot of rivers. And, after about 2 weeks there, I was put with the 199th Light Infantry Unit. And my MOS in the military was 11 Bravo or 11B. And I actually had some training as a metal detector, so I got 11B20 out of it, which is 20 is a little bit more advanced, but I never did do metal detecting. But that's what I was qualified to do. So March the 29th, by the way, is my birthday, my 21st birthday. March 29th, 1969. I was on a bus, and they drove us out to a fire base camp somewhere near Saigon. Now it's called Ho Chi Minh City, but Saigon, and probably 15 or 20 miles out on the edge of nowhere. So I got off the bus, and there was a big Chinook, that's a twin rotor helicopter, sitting there, and they said get on the helicopter, and so we jumped on the helicopter, and that's where I learned my first lesson. Was you don't run up to the back end of a Chinook helicopter because there are two jet engines firing out the back. So it's a good way to get cremated instantly. So I learned that pretty quick. I almost got burnt. You load from the side. There's a ramp, so there were about 25 or 30 of us got on that big Chinook helicopter. And as they lifted off, they attached underneath of it, they carried a big, I think it was a 155 millimeter cannon. And they picked up and took us too. They took us somewhere, I have no idea. From that point until I was wounded, I had no idea where I was in Vietnam. They just kept picking us up every day with not Chinooks, but regular Huey helicopters. There would be 6 or 8 or 10 of us jump on the helicopter, and they'd pick us up and move it from one place to another. Then we'd spend the night setting up an ambush somewhere, and setting up claymore mines at night, and kind of looking for enemy infiltrating into the outskirts of Saigon. So every day we'd go on day patrols, and then at night we would set up ambushes, usually out in the middle of nowhere, either in some around rubber plantation or near pineapples. I was close to the pineapple fields and rice paddies. Rice paddies were, when I was in Vietnam in April, it started in April then, the monsoon season or heavy rain season had not started yet. It sprinkled a couple of days, but we didn't get any heavy rains. So it's kind of pretty dry. But we would, like I say, go on these ambushes, and at night we would set up an ambush just to try to see any moving enemy through the night. We used these thing called a starlight scope, which we looked through, and everything would appear green, but it actually light up the countryside for you could see if anything was moving, and that was kind of interesting. Then there would be about 6 or 7 of us in a squad to set up these ambushes, and then there had to be 2 people awake all night long. So you imagine how much sleep you get with 6 or 7 people, 2 people awake all the time. One thing that I always remember about Vietnam, I was scared every day. I was feared for your life. You never knew what you were going to encounter. I did not see a lot of heavy action in Vietnam, but we did capture an enemy soldier one night. We were going out, it was about dusk, we were headed out to set up an ambush somewhere, and go along this drainage canal, and all of a sudden this Viet Cong soldier all by himself, he was taking a bath in this drainage ditch, and we come up on him by surprise, but he had an AK-47 rifle with him, so he threw up his hands and surrendered right on the spot. Of course, I was new in country, so the new people get to work point, which is being you're the first guy in front, because everybody else, it's a dangerous position to be into. But anyway, so we captured this guy, and it was just about dusk, and he could have shot us. He could have went down shooting, but he didn't. So we called in a helicopter. It was dark when the helicopter came, and when the helicopter comes in to pick somebody up, a prisoner, and it's dark, the squad leader takes his helmet, turns it upside down, and he has a little strobe light puts in it. So he holds the strobe light so the helicopter can see the strobe and nobody else can see it. So the helicopter came down, he got within 4 feet of the ground, we shoved the prisoner on. The reason the helicopter could not get any lower is because the blades were cutting the tops of the trees off. They were, I never forget that. I saw limbs flying everywhere. But so they will chop tree tops off. So we put the guy on a helicopter, and after that, I don't know what happened to him. Sometimes they jump out, commit suicide because they don't want to be interrogated, or sometimes I don't know what happens to the people. So that was, we did stuff like that day after day, searching for the enemy and searching for enemy where they stored the ammunition and ammo caches, they call them. A lot of times we found one big ammo cache. It was a bunch of AK-47 ammunition stored in boxes buried underneath the water. And how we found it, there's a little plastic blue coat hanger hanging in this little bush above the edge of the water. So we got probing around right there, and we found about 8 or 10 boxes of AK-47 ammunition. So we dug that up, called it in, and somebody picked it up and took it somewhere. Anyway, so that's kind of what I did in Vietnam. They would resupply us every afternoon with new C rations and ammunition. I did not carry an M16 in Vietnam. I carried an M79 in a 45 hand weapon. So, and I also carried my C rations. I carried about 50 rounds of M79 ammunition. An M79 is a short, looks like a sawed-off shotgun. It shoots a 40 millimeter diameter projectile that explodes when it hits. It goes about 400, 450 meters. So we had to carry about 50 rounds of those, and to get, they were half a pound apiece, so that's 25 pounds you get to carry around your neck, plus a couple bandoliers of M60 ammunition. There was I think 100 rounds in each bandolier of that, and then you carried your M79, you carried your steel pod. I had a flak jacket on, which we have one here in the museum. You carried, sometime when you wrote a letter home, you carried your paper and pencil up inside your helmet, in the helmet liner, so it stayed dry. Sometimes we would take a break, we'd be walking somewhere, and we'd take a break, and we would write a letter home, or they'd have mail call when they'd resupply us in the afternoon, and you'd get you'd get a letter from home, or cookies, or whatever. I remember one time I got a box of cookies, chocolate chip cookies that my mother sent. Of course, they were stale. It only took a couple weeks to get there, but and it was the cookies were in popcorn, and actually the popcorn tasted better than the cookies. But I thought was interesting. Anyway, then as our one day, April 21st, 1969, we took a break, and we were sitting along this roadside. It was one of the paved roads. I think it's Highway 1, 2, or 3, or whatever, one of the major roads west of Saigon. And took the break, and I think I wrote a letter home. And then after the break, it was just about 11 o'clock, 11 or 11:30 in the morning. Then we were searching out some old abandoned houses in that area, just to see if they had any ammunition stored in them. Because the enemy liked to store stuff underneath the floors and wherever they could to hide it from during daytime. So we searched out this one old house. The house was probably, I don't know, 14, 15 foot square. It wasn't a very big house. Nobody lived there. We couldn't find anything, and then there was another house about, probably 200 feet away. So the platoon sergeant said, go ahead, and if we didn't find anything here, let's go over to that next house and see what we can come up with. So the platoon sergeant behind me is the one that told me to, we did a good job on this house, let's go over to the next one. So I started to walk over to this next house. It took about 3 steps, and bang. It was that was the day that changed my life forever. I hit this booby-trapped hand grenade. It was a Chinese communist-made hand grenade, made out of junk. I don't know what had in it, but it was black powder because it took my breath. I tripped a tripwire, and about 6-7 feet behind me was my platoon leader. He caught shrapnel also. And so I got shrapnel in both lower legs. I remember it knocked me down. I couldn't walk. I was in a lot of pain. So the medic come over to me, and I remember this the rest of my life. The medic said, "You got $1 million wounds, you're going back to the world." So that was true. I don't know about the $1 million, but I went back to the world. They flew in a dust-off, which was a Huey helicopter, that picked myself up and the platoon sergeant that got hit with me. And we were on 2 stretchers, or litters they call them. And on this helicopter, I was on the one on the bottom, he was the one on the top. They flew us to Saigon, to the 3rd Field Military Hospital. Got me right in surgery, and I'm sure they did him too. That was the largest hospital in Vietnam, a military hospital called Field Hospital. And so I remember going to surgery, and first they took me off the helicopter. They took a guard. I had me on a steel table, or stainless steel gurney, wherever you call it, and they took a garden hose and hosed me off. And then they cut my boots off and my trousers off because I was soaked in blood. Got me right into surgery, and the first thing they did, they gave me a spinal tap because they thought I just had lunch, which I didn't. So they gave me a spinal tap, and I laid back on a table, and all my pain went away, and that was a big relief. Then the doctors, you've seen the show MASH on TV years ago. If you haven't, you need to watch it. It's very funny. That's exactly how it is in a real military hospital too. Because if they didn't, they would probably go insane. The doctor was telling jokes, and I was laughing at the jokes, and they were picking shrapnel on my legs. So then I went through recovery. I spent about 4 days, maybe 5 days, and they gave me the Purple Heart the next morning after I was hit. Lieutenant came by and pinned the Purple Heart to my pillow, and gave me a letter or whatever, congratulating me for earning the Purple Heart. 4 or 5 days after I was wounded, they flew me to Camp Zama, Japan. I was in Japan for about another month. Went through another couple surgeries. I had a USO person come by and visit with me and take my picture with him. And Lewis Charles, I think was his name. He played a lot of roles in a lot of movies, westerns and what have you. Then they flew me after about a month there at Camp Zama, Japan. They flew me to San Francisco, Travis Air Force Base. And I remember that flight. We left Tokyo, Air Base in Tokyo. It was on a Saturday morning about 6 o'clock, and we arrived in San Francisco Saturday morning about the same time. But anyway, we left, I'm sorry, I got confused there. We left Tokyo about 11 o'clock Saturday morning and arrived in San Francisco about 6 o'clock Saturday mornings because we went across to Dateland again. I spent about 3 days there at the Travis Air Force Base Hospital, and I actually got to call home and talk to my parents for the first time since I got wounded. And after 3 days, then they flew me to Denver, Colorado, to Fitzsimmons Army Hospital, where I I spent the next year on nerve damage in my legs. I didn't lose my legs, but I had nerve damage. And the nerve damage, I had to wear braces. They had to try to repair nerves, which it was a very complicated procedure. They put me in these long leg, bent leg casts, get me on crutches. So it took a lot of surgeries to get me back rehabilitated. Meanwhile, I had a couple leaves, convalescent leaves, to come home and see my parents and friends, and then I'd go back and come home again. So I did that for about a year. Then I was medically discharged, which I didn't know anything what that was all about. But they retired me from the military because they said I was unfit for military duty because of my injuries. Well, that's fine and dandy. And I found out you have, just like you serve for 20 years in the service, you get all the benefits that go with it. So anyway, that's, so after I was discharged from the service, I went to, enrolled in the University of Colorado, in Boulder, Colorado, because I was at Fitzsimmons Hospital for a while. So I enrolled there in the School of Environmental Design with some other veterans, and made some good friends, made some good acquaintances. And then I started having some more problems with my injury, so I went back to the VA and had some more surgeries. And then I couldn't get around very well, so I moved back to Illinois and Pittsfield mainly, and then I went back in the VA hospital in Columbia, Missouri, which I just opened up, and had some more surgeries for about another year. So I was about another year of several surgeries, and even one of them got a staph infection. They had to go reoperate on me. So anyway, all my time in the service, I'm glad I served my country. A lot of good memories. There were some good memories in Vietnam. Not every day was total terror, but some days there was. Let's see, what else?
About friendships that you would have came across,
yeah,
old buddies.
Yeah, I had some really good friendships, and so, matter of fact, one of the friendships, the guy I was in basic training was from St. Louis, and we stayed in touch. He was in Vietnam. We flew to Vietnam together. He was in the 199th Light Infantry. I was in a Charlie Company's 2nd and 3rd, and he was in a different unit of the 199th, but he spent a whole year in Vietnam and didn't get a scratch on him. I'm very happy for him. But we stay in touch. He lives in the St. Louis area, and once in a while we see each other about maybe once a year, once every other year. Another fascinating thing is talked about acquaintances in the service. The gentleman that was behind me, the platoon sergeant, who was wounded also, that was his second Purple Heart. He got wounded a couple months before I did. And I always wondered who these people were, or what happened to them. So I did a lot of research, and I found out he lived in Joplin, Missouri. So I looked the guy up. I called him. I think I scared him to death. But we went and had a reunion a couple of years ago, and that was very, very, very nice reunion to meet him. And we had a night. We spent a whole day together, and that's just one of the pleasant memories I have. We stay in touch. We send cards, and we call once in a while. And another fascinating thing, about 4 years ago, there's the 3rd Field Hospital from Saigon, which was there from, I think, 1966 through 1970 or about then. They had a reunion in Chicago, and so my wife and I decided to go to it, and we went to the reunion, and I actually met the doctors and nurses that took care of me in Vietnam. And the reason I know it was them is because they had name tags and dates that they were there. They were on call 24/7. And so they didn't remember me, but they remember my, we know that they remember everything about the hospital. And so we had a good time with those people. And I met the triage nurse that took me off a helicopter. She lives down in Atlanta, Georgia. And I met the recovery room nurse who lives in Springfield, Illinois. And we've become good friends since I got out of service. And we get together with her family once in a while, and she comes over here once in a while and visits. One other thing that happened when I went to, earlier I said I went to a trade school in St. Louis, right after I got out of high school. And I had a roommate, his name was Thomas Nebel. He was from Keota, Iowa. And we both got drafted about the same time. We were both in the infantry, and we both got wounded about the same time. He was in a different unit than I was. He was in the 9th Infantry down in the southern part of Vietnam, down in what they call the Delta area. He was in what they call the 4th Corps. I was in the 3rd Corps, and then there's 2 other corps. Up farthest north we call I Corps or 1st Corps. I was in the 3rd Corps near Saigon. Tom Nebel was in the 4th Corps, very far south, and we stayed in touch. And I got wounded before he did. I think he got wounded in May 14th or something. Anyway, I got a letter from him that he got shot in the stomach by an AK-47. So then I got a call when I was in Fitzsimmons Army Hospital in Denver, Colorado. Got a call from his father that Tommy had passed away. Probably was the most, I don't know, painful part of my whole military was because we were like brothers. We were that close, and we roomed together, did the same classes, and we both worked at the school part time to generate money to go through school in St. Louis and graduate together. And anyway, so I have in our museum here, I have a magazine with his picture in it. And when I met this lady from Springfield that was my recovery room nurse, I told her about Tom Nebel, and she took out a picture, and she remembered him. Now, how there's 66,000 soldiers that went through the hospital, but she remembered him. She had a picture of him. So that was quite and still is quite an emotional thing for me to remember about my service. But I have no bitterness toward the military. I think everybody should serve the country somehow or another. We need military support in this country. It's an unfortunate thing we have to have, but we have to have it. I have taken a lot of pride in our little museum here. I started this, some other folks about 2 years ago. We had a meeting we thought it would be nice to have an all-wars military museum in Pittsfield. So the building was available. We just work on it, and we gather in stories like I'm doing right now of people's military careers. And because everybody's in the military has a story, and just like I'm telling my story now. I'm sure when the camera's off, I'll remember things I probably forgot now, but I have a lot of good memories, basically in training. And the first 2 weeks of basic training is basically hell. At least it was then. A lot of harassment, and then you get to know each other, and you know it's all good. It's all good. Then advanced training in Fort Lewis, Washington. We had a lot of fun there. Got to shoot a lot of weapons that you only do in the military. But a lot of good times, a lot of marching times, a lot of good times. I remember in Fort Lewis. That was in 1969. There in February of '69, and that's when they were test flying the brand new 747 jumbo jet. I remember that jet flying over because it's distinct white with red stripe on it. I remember seeing that. I see it on the news now that's when it was test flying it. So that's not too far from Seattle. Fort Lewis is south of Seattle, about 15, 20 miles. And the Seattle's where Boeing aircraft, that's where they're made. So that was interesting. But John, any other questions?
For your museum here, would you like to add how many veterans that you were telling me about from Pike County?
Yeah, we have, Pike County is very supportive of the military, always has been. Civil War, there were 3,132 Civil War soldiers served in the Civil War from Pike County. I think that's incredible. There were, I don't know the numbers of World War I, World War II. We have a lot of World War I, World War II paraphernalia here. We have volunteers for our museum here. We have about 10 or 12 really good volunteers. The oldest one's about 84 years old, good volunteer. We have a couple around 80 years old. I'll be 69 in the March next month. It's hard finding younger people that take an interest in volunteering, but they're out there. Sometimes we have high school students during the summer help us do things, which we're very appreciative of. Back to the military people, Vietnam, we know there were 10 soldiers from Pike County that were killed in Vietnam, a hostile action. And there's another one that we're trying to find out his connection to Pike County. That could be as many as 11 men. We know there were 10 Korean soldiers from Pike County that got killed in Korea. I forget what the figures are on World War II, 123 or something like that, and about 50 World War I veterans from Pike County. So Pike County's been very supportive in all of our military efforts throughout history. And that's what we're doing here in our museum, is recognizing those people that have served. And like our wall of fame here, honoring those who served, and that's what we do here. We're honoring with the best way we can the people that served this country, this great country of ours. And John?
Something going through my mind as you were, I want to take you back to when you were serving, whether you'd want to share this or not, but what did you guys do sometimes in your downtime to entertain yourselves?
Okay, in Vietnam there really wasn't much downtime. We were on patrol, setting up ambushes, going somewhere all the time. We were picked up during the daytime by helicopters and flown to some other place and dropped off. I never knew where I was. I was always lost, and maybe that's good, I don't know. In basic training and downtime, we basically would sleep because they worked us to death. Then we do a lot of marching and running, and you get to know people. You got to develop some friendships. And the AIT was even closer yet. It was a little more relaxed. They weren't as much harassment on you. Not as much harassment in advanced training as there was in basic training. Just a bunch of good people. And I remember the first time in AIT in Fort Lewis, we were sitting around one evening, and there was a little PX or something down the street, and we went down and we got a hamburger. It's the first hamburger I had since October, and it was good. I remember the song playing on the jukebox. I heard it through the grapevine. Remember that? But that I just remember that plain as can be. But a lot of good times, and I think anybody in the military, I don't care what branch, or even in the war zones, sometimes there were good times to be had. Just talking about home, talking about your wife or girlfriend, and what you're going to do when you get out. And I remember in Vietnam, there was everybody that used a term called short. Here in the museum, we have a helmet sitting on top 2 boots and the word short. Well, they can take that to mean whatever you want. But in Vietnam, it was short. The closer it was when you're going to go back to the States, go home, the shorter you were. So that became a pretty popular. So everybody in Vietnam, including myself, we were there 2 days, we started yelling short, even though we're a long ways from going home. But there were a lot of good times in the military, and I just think it was, had the opportunity to do it. I served my country, and I'm very proud of that. And there's a lot of stories to be told in this county, from very, very good stories, and some heroic people in this county that served the United States military, and I'm very proud of that. And we're trying to honor that here. We have an artist in our little museum here. There's an artist that is painting portraits, oil painted portraits of all the soldiers killed in Vietnam that lived in Pike County. I think that's quite an honor. And we're going to, matter of fact, I think tomorrow I'm going to Quincy, and lives up in Quincy. I'm going to pick up 4 or 5 of them he's already got done. So that's kind of my story, and what they say, I'm sticking to it. So I think that may conclude this video this time.
Okay. Thank you.
All righty, thank you. See ya.